In a world of harsh judgment, where secrets bury the innocent, June's life took a brutal turn when her father discovered her pregnancy. He didn't ask who the father was, just dragged her into the wilderness and gave her away like livestock. But the man he gave her to was anything but what anyone expected. Hook 1. Could this stranger be her salvation or her doom? He didn't speak much, just pointed to the cabin door, then walked back toward the shed like she was no different from the sack of feed her father had left him along with her. June stood there, her wrist still red from the rope burn, her eyes swollen from the slap she hadn't seen coming. Her father hadn't given her a final word, only a grunt. Then he rode off back down the mountain trail without looking back. She was barely 17, barefoot in snow, belly beginning to swell, and now left in the middle of nowhere with a man twice her size who hadn't said a single word. The cabin door creaked open. Warmth hit her face. Firelight danced from the hearth across the wooden floor. A cot in one corner, a rough table, a basin, hooks on the wall with furs, a shotgun over the mantel. Then she turned. He was gone. June stepped in slowly, the door shutting behind her by the wind's hand, not his. She sank down by the fire, clutching her arms around her middle. Her father hadn't asked who the father was. He hadn't asked anything. Just marched into her room, pulled her out by the hair, and stuffed her into the wagon. "It's your shame," he'd growled. "You'll live with it or die with it. I won't have your sin rotting this house." And then the ride, hours, no food, no stop, only snow and silence, and the sound of her own heart breaking in her ears. Now the only thing breaking was the firewood in the hearth. Then the sound of heavy boots coming back up the porch. She didn't move. He opened the door with a push of his shoulder, taller than she remembered. Broad shoulders under a wolf pelt, thick beard, dark eyes. He glanced at her once, just once, then walked to the fire, tossed down 2 rabbits, and started skinning them without a word. She stared at him. He didn't glance back. Finally, her voice cracked. "What's your name?" He didn't look up. "I said, Rook." Just that, a flat word. Then silence again, thick and awkward. Her fingers trembled in her lap. "What do you want from me?" she asked, staring now. Still no eye contact. He gutted one of the rabbits. "I didn't ask for you," he muttered. The words hit like a slap. June felt the sting in her chest, but she bit it down. She'd cried enough that morning. She wouldn't give him the tears now. She laid down on the floor beside the fire that night. He hadn't offered the cot and she didn't dare take it. Her hands curled around her belly. She hadn't told anyone yet, but she felt it already. The tiny fluttering inside her that didn't come from hunger or fear. The life growing in her. The only thing she had left. The next few days passed in silence. Hook 2. What secrets lie beneath Rook's silent exterior? Real Stories Diary. Rook left before dawn, returned after dusk, always with meat or wood or both. She never saw where he went, only heard the sound of axe striking tree, gunfire in the woods, birds scattering. He never touched her, never asked questions, didn't even look at her long. June cleaned because she didn't know what else to do. Cooked what little she could, though her hands were clumsy from lack of practice. Her father hadn't let her near the hearth, said that was her mother's job till the day she died. It was on the 5th morning that she saw the blood. It stained the front of her dress when she woke. Her scream brought him in from outside, snow on his shoulders, axe in hand. "I'm bleeding," she whispered, voice shrill. "It's too early. I can't. I don't know." He moved fast, tossed the axe down, came to her side, looked once, then swept her up in his arms, and carried her to the cot without asking permission. She lay there shivering, whispering over and over, "Please not the baby. Please not the baby. Please not the baby." Rook didn't speak, just stoked the fire hotter, then boiled water, then brought every fur in the cabin over to cover her. She saw his hands tremble once, just once, as he wrapped her legs and checked the bleeding. Hours passed. The blood slowed. The cramping stopped. She didn't lose it. He sat beside her that night on the floor, back to the wall, watching the fire with a face she couldn't read. You cared, she whispered. He didn't blink. Don't flatter yourself. But his voice cracked when he said it. She didn't say anything else. Just listened to the crackle of firewood in the soft, steady breath of the man who hadn't smiled once since she arrived, but had carried her like something breakable. By the second week, she started to notice things. A second bowl placed beside his at dinner, even if he didn't offer it. A blanket folded near the hearth, new, clean, untouched, but left there for her. Her boots stitched at the sole, mended without her asking. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't kind either. He was something else, something unreadable. Then came the storm. It roared down from the mountains like a beast, trapping them in the cabin for 5 days straight. Wind howled. Snow buried the porch. The fire stayed lit, but food ran low. They spoke only in essentials. Hand me that pot. There's a leak by the shutter. Eat this. It's warm. But it was on the third night after she slipped on the ice by the door, landing hard, that he finally raised his voice. What were you thinking going out like that? She winced, holding her elbow. I needed snow for water. I told you I'd get it. You were asleep. He grabbed the bandages and moved toward her. She flinched. He stopped cold. I'm not your father, he said, voice low. She looked up, startled. He crouched down gentler now. You don't flinch like that unless someone's made you expect a blow. She said nothing. I won't hit you, he muttered, even if you mouth off. She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, You're the first man who's ever said that to me. Rook didn't reply, just wrapped her arm carefully, his big hand strangely tender. That night, she sat on the cot instead of the floor. He didn't stop her, and when she cried, silent, slow, ashamed, he didn't speak, just sat in the dark, listening. It was the 6th week when the fever came. She woke drenched in sweat, teeth chattering, the world spinning. Rook's hand was on her forehead before she could call his name. He said nothing, just bolted to the door, saddled the mule, and vanished into the storm. He was gone 2 days. When he returned, his face was windburned, lips cracked, hands frozen near black, but he had herbs, cloth, and something warm in a flask she didn't recognize. She sipped it and slept. When she woke again, the fever had broken. Rook looked worse than her, gaunt, eyes dark with worry. She whispered, Why'd you come back? He blinked. She tried to smile. You could have let the fever do the work. He didn't laugh, just shook his head once. I'm not your father. That was all he said. But it was enough. The spring thaw came late, clawing its way down the mountain like something reluctant to wake. Mud swallowed the trail. Ice clung to the roof. The snows melted, but the cold lingered as if it too wasn't ready to leave. Rook was gone longer each day now, trapping and foraging, carrying more than usual on his shoulders, though he barely spoke of it. June's belly grew quietly, a steady bloom beneath the folds of her threadbare dress. He didn't mention it. Didn't ask how far along she was, but she saw the glances. The way his eyes dropped sometimes when she moved too fast or reached too high. He noticed. He always noticed even when he pretended not to. He didn't smile, not once, but he boiled her bathwater now without being asked. Left bread by the hearth in the mornings. Took to carving little things, small animals mostly, and leaving them on the windowsill like they'd walked in by accident. Once she found a wooden bird, wings spread like it had just landed. He never said it was his. June didn't press, but she watched him closely now, trying to read the edges of the man who had no patience for conversation, but had carried her through fever, wrapped her wounds, mended her boots, and brought back wildflowers wrapped in bark as if by mistake. And still he said nothing about the child growing inside her until the day the dog followed him home. It was scraggly, half-starved, with a limp in its hind leg, and eyes as desperate as its ribs were sharp. Rook found it near the trapline, snarled at him once, then collapsed at his feet. He brought it back without a word. June was the one who named it. Tinder, she said, stroking its matted fur by the fire that night. 'Cause he caught quick to the warmth. Rook didn't argue. He just kept his back to her, sharpening his blade with June couldn't imagine how far he'd walk to find her. But she also couldn't imagine going back. Not to that house, not to that town, not to the world that spat her out like spoiled milk. It was different now. She had hope. She had quiet. She had Rook. And she had no idea where she stood with him. Rook had barely said 3 words since the boy arrived. He'd gone back to his routine, cleaning, chopping wood, checking traps. But something was wound tighter in his shoulders now, something guarded in the way he watched June and Seth when he thought they weren't looking. He didn't ask her what she planned to do. But he didn't need to. The choice was circling her all night, scratching at her brain like a restless bird. Could she go back? Was it even safe? What if the people had truly turned against her father? What if they hadn't? What if the whispers about the preacher's son reached the wrong ears and they turned it all back on her again? And what about Rook? He hadn't said much about the child, but he'd stayed. He'd helped. He'd carved a cradle. She'd found it behind the cabin, half finished, made from pinewood in patience. The man who'd once only grunted at her now made her tea when she woke in the night. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it stayed in his eyes even after his lips had returned to a frown. She didn't want to lose that. Didn't want to lose him. The next morning, the boy woke early, rubbing his eyes and looking around like he half expected to find it had all been a dream. He sat stiff at the table while June boiled oats. Hope was bundled close against her chest, twitching every now and then in newborn sleep. Seth cleared his throat. "Mama's sick." June paused. "What kind of sick?" "Her lungs. She's coughing up dark stuff. They say she won't last till summer unless she gets help." June turned from the stove. "And you came here alone?" He nodded. "Didn't have no choice. We ain't got money for doctors. And Mama kept saying she needed to see you again. Said she needed to ask your forgiveness before he trailed off." June sat down slowly, heart pounding. The anger she'd carried for months tried to rise, but it was smothered by something heavier, grief maybe, or something softer, something tired. Why didn't she stop him? She whispered when he beat me, when he gave me away like I was cattle. She tried. I swear she did, Seth said, his voice small. But he told her if she ever spoke against him, he'd send her off same as he did you. And Mama, she ain't strong like you. June's jaw clenched. I wasn't strong. I just got lucky. No, Seth said, you got out. Rook stepped in then, shaking off snow, arms heavy with kindling. He said nothing. Just set the wood near the hearth and knelt to feed the fire. June looked at him. Did you hear? He nodded once. She studied his face. There was something hidden behind those dark eyes. Not judgment, not hope. Something like a wall built long ago, stone by stone. I don't know what to do, she said. You don't have to decide now, Rook replied. But she did, because in that moment, she realized something about herself, about everything that had happened since the day her father threw her on that wagon like a sack of grain. She hadn't just survived. She'd changed. Hardened, yes, but not in the way he'd meant her to. She was no longer someone else's problem. She was a mother now, and mothers don't run. That night, she packed a small bag, enough clothes for a few days. Rook gave her one of his coats. It drowned her, but she took it anyway. He didn't say much while she wrapped Hope in blankets, just hovered near the door like he was waiting for the last moment. Seth had already saddled one of Rook's mules. The journey back to town would take a full day if they hurried, maybe longer with a newborn. I won't stay long, June said quietly. Just long enough to see her. Long enough to know the truth. Rook nodded. You need anything? She stepped closer. I know. There was a silence between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with everything they hadn't said, everything they might still say later. Then, just before she turned to leave, he said, You come back. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a demand. It was a promise. She squeezed his hand. I will. The road was worse than she remembered. Frozen ruts still lined parts of the trail, and the mule struggled under the weight of the three of them. June took turns walking to ease the burden, clutching hope to her chest beneath the folds of Rook's coat. They arrived on the second morning when the sun was just beginning to burn through the clouds. The town hadn't changed. Not really. Still smelled like sawdust and horses, still carried that low hum of whispers waiting to erupt into shouts. But people looked at her differently now. Not with scorn, not with pity, with fear. It was the baby, she thought, or maybe the fact that she'd returned when they'd all counted her gone. Either way, she walked down that dirt road with her head high, her brother at her side, and not one person called her a name. Her mother was dying. The doctor confirmed it. Lungs failing, fever high, days left, maybe a week. They found her curled in bed, her once sprouted frame sunken into the mattress, her eyes clouded and rimmed with sorrow. When June stepped into the room, the woman tried to sit up, failed. "June," she rasped, "my baby." June sat down, laid Hope gently in her arms. For a moment, the two women just stared at each other. "I'm sorry," her mother said. "I should have protected you." June blinked back tears. "You should have." "I know." And that was all. Forgiveness didn't come in a flood. It came in a whisper, a breath, a shared look between mother and daughter and granddaughter. She stayed 3 days, long enough to sit beside her mother as the woman slipped from this world. Long enough to see the preacher's son arrested after Seth, emboldened by his sister's return, told the sheriff everything. Long enough to stand over her father's empty chair and realize he'd never return. Cowards don't die brave deaths. They just vanish. When June left the house for the last time, she carried Hope in one arm and Seth beside her. The boy looked up at her with something new in his eyes. Not just admiration, but trust. "What now?" he asked. She looked to the mountains. "I go home." He hesitated. "Can I come?" She studied his face. So young, so broken, so much like her. "Only if you're ready to work." He grinned. They made it back 3 days later. The trail was worse coming up, but June didn't feel it. The ache in her legs, the sting in her hands, it was all a price she was willing to pay. And when the cabin came into view, smoke curling from the chimney like a beacon, she felt something twist in her chest. Rook was there standing on the porch, waiting. He stepped forward as she dismounted, eyes flicking from her to Seth to the bundle in her arms. "You came back," he said. She smiled. "Told you I would." Then, before she could think better of it, she pressed the baby into his arms. Hope stirred, blinked up at the man with the rough beard and gentler hands. "She's heavier now," he murmured. "She eats like her mother," June said with a laugh. And just like that, the three of them stepped inside. Home didn't always look like what you imagined. Sometimes it looked like a mountain man with too many scars, a boy with too much fear in his eyes, and a girl who'd once been thrown away learning she was worth being fought for. But it was home, and it was just beginning. The cabin had only ever known silence. It had been built by Rook's hands, braced against the wind, seasoned by the cold, carved into the earth like he'd meant it to stand long after he was gone. For years, the only sounds it heard were the creak of wood under heavy boots and the whisper of fire crackling low. Now it was filled with something else entirely. Movement, voices, the squall of a baby in the dawn hours, laughter, and grief. It was strange how grief followed them, even here, this far from town, where no one else came. June felt it when she opened the cupboard, and her hand froze at the worn jar that once belonged to her mother. When she stepped out to gather snow for water and heard Seth coughing in the morning cold, too thin for the air. When Rook sat too quietly near the fire, watching the baby sleep, his hand resting on the cradle he'd built as though anchoring himself to it. Grief lived in the edges of joy sometimes, but June had learned not to fear it anymore. She knew it meant something had mattered. They had settled into a rhythm of sorts. Not easy, not smooth, but real. Seth took to chores with quiet intensity. Maybe because he didn't want to be sent away. Maybe because it was the first time someone let him feel needed. June cooked and sewed and held her daughter close every hour she could, often rocking Hope in the cradle. Rook had finished with his own hands while they were